Hello everyone, this is Daniel, and I'm going to do the history of the Bible from the very beginning of the foundation of the world to, from foundation of um, the angels, elite, and God, to the world, to the end. Alright, so the end is going to be today, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we know what's going to happen in the very end, so I'm going to skip a moment. Alright. So this is what happened in the very beginning. In the very beginning, there was no light, there was darkness, and basically, God said, "Let there be light." So then it starts with Him creating the foundations of the heavens and space and earth. Then He created earth. He created the animals of the earth and vegetation of the earth. Then He told all the angels He was going to create man. But, one of the prophets of heaven said, "Okay, God told me in a vision that humanity is going to be not as smart as anything else, and spiritually they're going to be very dumber than sheep." And Satan was like, "Oh, really? This stupid?" And then he said, "Gosh, wait till you hear this." He said, "Of course. How stupid can they get?" And he said, "They're going to reign over everyone except for God. They're going to be the second place in reigning over everyone." And this offended one-third of the angels and him, because he was also offended, and he was the first one to become evil. So was Satan, because of his interesting trick. He was actually the child star of Babylon and, of course, of Hollywood. So basically, this is what happened. The devil got kicked out of the kingdom of heaven, and Adam and Eve were created. First Adam and then Eve. Then the devil tricked Adam and Eve because he was so evil and so offended by that. And offended basically was the source of all, the source of all sin. Offended. And emotions. A source of all evil. Excuse me. Then Adam and Eve sinned because of the devil, because he was so deceitful, because of his ways were being taught by that one spirit of Babylon, the one that deceives people. Because the deceiver of Babylon knows exactly everything that deceives everyone. And he taught the devil his ways, and the devil became twice as evil. And of course, the devil was the first one to make everyone fall. And he was a king of all evil. And the deceiver made him the deceiver of all deceivers. So basically, remember, the devil was God's second hood. The devil was God's vice president and vice king, and he was in charge of basically everything of the south and God of the north. But basically, God told the messenger, which was now the messenger of Babylon. So now we go to we carry on to what goes next. Then basically, Adam and Eve had to restore their faith. Basically, the first murderer was Adam's son, Cain. Then it went to later on, and Eve died. Then the descendants of throne sonhood and then daughterhood of what they would descend from. Basically, I don't know what the name was, but they would descend from later on, from what was going on, then fallen angels, would have intercourse with these men, and they were brave. They were brave angels because they would have intercourse with men. I mean, intercourse with women. What was it? Yeah, they would become men and have intercourse with women, so they'd have giants. So basically, women had giants. Then Enoch came along and started preaching about the future, basically the great fall of man. If God doesn't change his mind, we're all doomed, and there's a new creation of man, and the devil would be successful. So God found a way, and he found a way through Noah and his family. The giants overpowered everyone, and then before that, you know, Enoch had been carried away in the whirlwind, deep in the forest, because he said he didn't want to see any of this anymore because people were being, they were literally falling away. They were literally falling away rapidly, so he couldn't take it anymore. Then there was 8 people left, which was Noah's family. So Noah was told to make a ship, and he did it for some time. Then the ship was ready, and then the rain came and basically blew all the people away that were evil and giants. Then the ship landed. Then Noah came out and he said, "Alright, this is how it's going to be. If the land is dry, then we shall all come out." And then they all came out. And then Ham basically literally deceived him, and then Shem and Japheth brought him blankets so he could not be naked anymore. So Noah passed away. Then the Tower of Babel came. This is much later. The Tower of Babel came, and people lived much shorter lives due to God saying that people's lifespan be shorter. So the Tower of Babel came, and that tower was destroyed by God, and people spread out in their separate ways. And they became 3 generations of people, one of Chinese descent and one of Brazilian descent, and the other of, further tribes of Arab people, which were literally Arabs. Where were they? They became Egyptians. So these people became Egyptians. Funny that. So then there was collect the Bible. So then there was the people that were the tribe of Judah. There was the first person, which was Abraham, and he was righteous enough to leave the family behind that had false gods, because the giants had false gods when Enoch was around. So he left them behind with false gods. Well, he left them behind that his family had false gods, and he left them behind. Then he had went to the land of Israel, which was reclaimed by Abraham. Then came the fall of another land, which was a massive fall, which was Sodom and Gomorrah in the other land, which created the Dead Sea. Then he had Judah. Then he had Joseph. Then he had went into. Then he had literally. Then Joseph had been caught, and then basically it wasn't Judah, it was Joseph, and he literally went to Egypt, where he had been caught from, and also the family of Abraham and Joseph and Judah. They were grieving because of, you know, because they had thought that he had died, but instead he was in Egypt, where he was a slave. But instead of being a slave, he was a prisoner, like prison guard. He would become a prisoner because of what happened, so he'd become less. But then he would become greater and greater after he had interpreted the dreams of the other people. Then, I see it's close. It's close. Then later, I didn't even read it, so it's okay. Then later, the people were basically saying this was the slave land, so basically they became slaves of Egypt. Then Moses was born. Then he fled because of what happened. Then he came back 40 years later. 40. And then he literally freed all the Jews because of the 10 plagues. The last one being the death of the firstborn. They said, leave at once. The Pharaoh did. And then Moses said, we should all leave. And then they left. Then, basically, the Pharaoh's army came. But then they were going to cross part of the Red Sea. And basically, the waves parted away. And they made land underwater. When the waves were parting away, then several of the Jewish people were crossing the water. A few million, like some million to be exact. Then Pharaoh's army was going to be going through the water, but then they were crushed by the waves through Moses' command through God. So now they were free, but then half the Israelites would be killed due to rebellion, mumbling, and all sorts of other stuff that they did, which was also false gods and all that. And of course, he would make the 10 Commandments, and then we would cross another river, which got part of the lands of the river before the other people would try to cross the water to attack them because of the army trying to cross to attack them. Then they were defeated, and then they made rocks to make this a dedication of the land. And it's never been harmed ever since. Then Israel, let's see here. Then Israel would become a nation. Before that, there would be literally attack of the giants, which were, the second reign of the giants. So they were all being defeated, and then there would be some left called the Philistines. Later on, there would be known as the judges of the land. So first there would be judges, then there would be kings. Because later on, people would rebel against the judges, so they made the first king Saul. Basically, Saul was the one that was the first king, but he also was a proud king. He was proud of what he had, so he wanted to do things that were not pleasing to God, but he didn't think it was, so he became violent afterward, and then later on, David became a king. But before that, David became a heir of the king, and he had all the commands of the military. And then David would become a king, and then Saul would die because of what he did. Then there would be King Solomon. That would be taking over David as the land of David. But then King Solomon became the wisest person, but then he became the most foolish person ever. Then he became the most wisest, but that would make the people of Israel rebel and then divide the land later on after a few kings. And then after a few more kings, the land was even more divided. Then there came the prophets of the land warning the people that they would be captured by Babylon because they were weakened because God was not with them. Then the prophets were right, of course. And then later on, the people were in Babylon, and Darius and Daniel was in Babylon, and so was his friends. He would be called Darius, and then he would make prophecies of everyone's dream, and so would Ezekiel and all that before that time. And then, there would be few people in Israel, but not a whole lot. They were mainly basically talking about false gods in Israel. Later on, Daniel would literally be over with, and then I think that's what happened. And then, that later on, Israel became another nation, became a land of the free Jews because Babylon was conquered, and the Jews became free. Then there would be a Greek Empire after that. Then a Roman Empire after the land of what was that land called? The Spartans. The land of the Spartans would become a Roman Empire. Then there would be many problems with the Greeks, and then Egypt would have its last pharaoh or king, and then it was like Cleopatra would be the last one. Then Jesus was born. Then he had to escape later on because there was Herod, which he heard the news, and he decided to, and Herod was the king of Israel through Rome, so Rome would take over Israel, and then Jesus would be born, and then Jesus would be born, then Herod would take over the land, and then, when Herod heard that Jesus was born, a new king was born in Israel as Jesus, he was offended, so he killed all the firstborn, but then he would die of a curse or of a disaster. Then Jesus would come back later on. He would go to the temples and really shock the Pharisees later on, or the Jewish leaders and Jewish priests, and they were really shocked about his preaching. And then several years later, he gets the Holy Spirit through John the Baptist, because when he got the Holy Spirit, he decided to go to the wilderness and then take it away from him until he had successfully defeated the devil in the wilderness. And when the devil said, bow down to me, he said, no, I will never bow down to you. That's what he said. He said, no, I'll never bow down to you. I would never bow down to you. Get away from me, Satan. That's what he said. Then he got the 12 disciples after that, and then he taught all the things in the 4 Gospels. And later on, he would be crucified on the cross. Then later on, the people of the disciples became apostles, and then the apostles became well known in their land, and then later on, Jerusalem would be taken out by Rome, and Rome would later on be taken out by fire from Nero, which he got the oil from, basically from some sort of person from Jerusalem. He gave it to him, and then he burned on all of Rome, except for some parts that were important. Then later on, Apostle Paul died because, before that, Apostle Paul became a Jew, and then he became a true Christian. That made the entire Bible. So basically, he made the entire part of the Bible, except for a few parts of the Bible, which were the Gospels, and the end parts of the Bible. And later on, he would be killed. Later on, there would be separate books from that, and then John. Then John was captured and put in the pot of oil, of boiling oil. Then later on, he was, banished to an island of Patmos. Then he would make real revelations. And that's not just the end of the Bible, that's later on. Then later on, Rome would become a wealthy city, and there would be Christian persecution everywhere, and all over the place, and including Rome and Greece and all that. Then later on, Rome would be crushed by an opponent. He was the one that made the Catholic Church. Then he would make it, rebuild it as a pagan Roman place. And then later on came the time that Rome had been completely destroyed of technology. It had been completely conquered. Then there was no longer technology coming from Rome. Then, of course, Rome had been later on made into another city, and Jerusalem has lost its capital, and so has Israel later on. Then, basically, there was church later on in the medieval times that provided for Catholicism only, and there was great persecution from Christians to Christians. Then there was Muslim people that persecuted the Christians, so that would bring up an army against the Muslims through Christians. Then later on, 11,000 AD, there was a manuscript from Daniel that was about to be lost through the modern times. So someone had made a book called an account of Darius of Pontus through a basically keg that would never through a very small keg, the square box, keg-like box. Basically, he hid that book so that no one could find it until the end. And basically, he made the book called An Account of Darius of Pontus, and we're about to find that out later on today. Then came the later times of the Black Plague, because of the curse of the Catholic Church, because of them creating Satanism through witchcraft, and they also made the what should we have left? Yeah, that was plenty. Then they had made then they had caused the Great War of the Great Conspiracy of the Knights of the Templar, the Knights, yeah, the Knights, the Christian Knights. Then later on, people moved from England to Australia. They were persecuted Christians and criminals, and then they would make a land of Australia. And later on, people got an idea, decided to go to, that's before that person of Christopher Columbus would go to the land that was called India, but he discovered America. So the people of England decided to go to America, and so would other nations. Then, basically, there was a time of persecution of the descendants of Ham, then there was a great revolutionary war that would end up causing the people to create America, and then we decided to call ourselves United States of America. Then there was much upheaval of the Civil War and slavery. Then the European Union came. Then came the World War I. That ended up causing the world to be in the last days. Then there was an upheaval of World War II to go against the Jews. Then later on, after World War II, Israel became a nation after several hundred years, like a few thousand years, couple of thousand years. Then later on, let's see what time we have. Oh my! Later on, in the 60s, Jerusalem was freed from the land of Palestine. I think, yeah, maybe. Then we had basically the gas crisis. Then we had we became modern back in the 20s. So then we had the modern strike again back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. We became the most high tech providence of all time, and then later on, people started creating all the lands of it's basically what's happening now is basically the Arabs were causing the Taliban. Then after the Taliban, oh my, there was 9/11, which caused an even greater urgency of the end of the world. Then there were prophecies. We had false prophets and all that. Because before that, we had prophecies of the end, and now we are having it happen. And then, in the last term, Jerusalem became a capital when it wasn't. And then, later on, the book called, the book of, an account with Darius Pontus will be called, into the book of the End Times Bible, which was actually written before the Bible, so it will be accepted. Then it will be called Faces of Angels. Then the end would come, great disaster would come, the Antichrist would come and trick almost all the Christians. There will be few left. There will be the rapture. Then there will be, oh my goodness. Then there will be, I'm going to have to end this, guys. So I'm going to end this and then basically make a part 2, okay? So bye.